My name is Rod Cookrow, and I'm lucky enough to be the chairman of Agenda Alexandria for the coming year. This is our first program of the 2022-2023 season, and it's good to see people here in the audience, and I know we have a good size audience online. We have a really nice panel on a very important topic, one that's been in the news a great deal in the past 3 to 6 months, and it's going to be moderated by my board colleague, Michael Lee Pope, who many of you, in fact, all of you probably know from his exploits as a reporter. Next month's program is going to be held at the Lyceum, not here, and that's going to be on the city's new proposal to grant developers bonus height density in exchange for them providing affordable housing. It's sort of a wholesale change to the city's zoning. We're still rounding up our panel for that, but we'll be announcing that online in the Zebra. I want to recognize in particular our chief sponsors. They've been with us through thick and thin since before the pandemic. That would be McInerney and Associates and the Simpson Development Company, and of course our friends at Zebra Press. Before I turn this over to Michael, I just want to ask for people to sort of recognize a moment of silence that we've lost two people close to Agenda Alexandria recently. One is Sherry Brown, who was the first executive director of Agenda Alexandria. She was an executive director for 15 years, from 2002 to 2017, and she passed only a few weeks ago. And then we were fortunate to have former Mayor Kerry Donnelly on our June panel, which had to do with who controls the future of your neighborhood, and he was well informed as usual, a fountain of knowledge, and funny several times during his presentation. And we lost Kerry this summer, as most of you know. So if we could just sort of think on the contributions those two people have made to the city, and in particular to helping Agenda Alexandria become the organization we have. All right. These programs tend to run an hour, give or take 5 minutes or so. The time will be kept by our moderator. I am going to have index cards that if you want a card to ask a question, write down a question, just raise your hand and I'll give you one. My only request would be to please write legibly, because there's nothing worse than me passing these cards to Michael and him having to figure out exactly what language you're speaking in. So without further ado, Michael.
Our back to school episode, our annual talk about schools and how they're doing, is a perfect opportunity to talk to these guests about the state of school security in Alexandria. And people are very concerned about the security of schools, and so this is a great opportunity to look at that with our amazing panel. I'm going to start on the other side of the stage here and introduce Julie Crawford, who is the Equity Chief at Alexandria City Public Schools. Thanks for joining us. And then next to him is the Chief of Police of Alexandria, Don Hayes. Thank you so much for joining us. And then former Superintendent Herb Berg, who was the longest serving superintendent since T.C. Williams, a very long time serving superintendent, and he's going to bring us his experience. And we also are joined virtually by Max Hedron. So we're joined virtually here by Renee Islis, and we really appreciate you joining us. We wish you could be here, but you're joining us virtually, right? So I am going to start by talking about a stabbing that happened at George Washington Middle School. And it was two rival gangs. There was one gang member who was jumped by another gang member. There was a stabbing, and the 16-year-old died. And so then the police arrested a different 16-year-old in this sort of gang warfare. And there was a trial. He was eventually served 5 years, eventually sentenced to 5 years. And the superintendent at that time was a guy by the name of Herb Berg. So talk about the reaction of the community when this stabbing happened and a 16-year-old fatally stabbed another 16-year-old. How did the community respond to that episode in the summer of 1996?
It's 26 years ago now. It was traumatic. I think similar to what happened at McDonald's here a few months ago now. Probably more public engagement at this time than it was at that time. Gangs in a middle school were not, people didn't talk about them, so the gang thing came out later. It was devastating to the school community, to the faculty and the young people who were in that school. I remember driving to the home of where the boy and his family lived and talking and hugging, embracing the parents, and it was an awful, awful situation. It was an awful situation. The one that happened here recently, I have to defer to the chief and others on that, but at the time, it was a devastating thing for the school community.
And do you think there was a danger at that time of the school system having a distraction, where the school system was not focused on student learning and might have been distracted by security concerns? Did you have that concern at that time?
I don't.
1996.
The whole issue of security in a school is different today. We've had shootings and all kinds of things around the country that had not happened at that point in America. So a single gang thing was different. Nowadays, it's on the news every night, all kinds of news cycles. It's just a different media world where that stuff is concerned.
Yeah, but before we move on, I want to make sure that I get your thoughts on student learning, right? So that the school system should not distract itself with a focus on security when their chief concern should be student learning.
I'm sorry, Michael. A student's death is a serious matter, not to be understated in any way. But you have 15,700 kids who lost 2 years of their educational life. That is a crisis of a huge magnitude. And I hope we get into that a little bit later. I have an opportunity to, but it seems to me the bigger crisis in the schools today is what happened to 2 years of your life. If you're in the second grade, you lost it. If you were in the third, you lost it. And I think that is the mega challenge for the school district, to get its focus on making up what happened.
Well, on that note, let's ask the police chief, Don Hayes, about what the police department is doing in response to this recent stabbing that former Superintendent Herberg was just mentioning, and also I think there was a sexual assault at a school. So clearly people are concerned now, just like they were in 1996. But you want people to know what the police department is doing, right? What can you tell our members about what the police department is doing in response to these recent incidents?
Well, Mike, the first thing I would like to say is that we took those incidents and every incident very seriously, and we have increased the presence of the police department in that area almost twofold. We actually have two officers that walk the Bradley Shopping Center on a daily basis while school is in service. We also have the McDonald's management, where they have a security guard there. We're working with them. We're working with the mall management system to make sure that we are on the same page, but we're also working with the schools too. We have the SROs back in the schools at the high school, and we also have an officer outside of the school when school is in session. And we have a communication system where when something happens that the SROs can respond up there to assist in that particular area. So as you can see, we're increasing our presence, we're increasing our partnerships with the shopping center up there, but also with the school personnel.
Excellent. And
Chief, can I come in here for a second?
You sure
Chief,
can.
When the boy died at GW 25 years ago, we had Dana Lawhorn. He wasn't even assigned to us. He was a juvenile officer. We didn't have SROs. We didn't have any of that kind of logistical police support that's available today. We had one officer assigned to, in those days, 10 or 11,000 kids. And in 25 years, there's a whole army of support out there.
Correct. It's totally different now because of the potential for what could happen. Like you said earlier, now I know parents don't understand and don't realize the magnitude of what happens in the schools, and because they see it nationwide with the school shootings and all of that. And we try to help calm that by making sure there's a presence there whenever those children are in school.
Well, on the subject of children being in school, our next panelist is Julie Crawford. She is the equity chief at Alexandria City Public Schools, and one of the things the school system is doing is trying to get a handle on substance abuse intervention. Explain the efforts of the school system there, because there sounds to me like there's a fentanyl problem in the school system, and you guys are trying to eradicate it. Is that right?
It is. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me and ACPS this evening. Substance abuse intervention and prevention services, we have partnered with the city for many years, working with our colleagues at DCHS, the Department of Community and Human Relations. We were lucky enough 4 years ago to bring a substance abuse counselor on board through our Department of Student Services and Equity. And we've continued the outreach and development of that program, working with the city and the police and court services. Where we are now, we are finding that ACPS is not that different from the nation, where we've seen an increase in substance abuse, both in our students and honestly in adults who dealt with the traumatic time of the pandemic. Since we have reopened and continued our partnership with the city, they have a specific opioid work group where they track instances in the community, and we also track and receive data from our students on what we're seeing in schools. I would say we do have a fentanyl crisis in the city, as evidenced by the opioid work group, and we are seeing times it's challenging as a school system to be able to identify the exact substance without getting the information from our students. But we know that many things that students may think are not as harmful, like marijuana, which of course we know is harmful and we don't want our students using, is more likely to be laced with fentanyl now. Fentanyl, you can have 2 grains that would sit on the end of this pen, and that could be a fatal dose. Depending on the dosage and the amount. I'm not sure if people saw the story that has come out in the past couple of days about rainbow fentanyl, which looks like sweet tarts, and just different ways that you have counterfeit pills. Really, really concerning. So we are working with our Alexandria Health Department as well as the city to track any trends that we're seeing, and we have expanded our substance abuse intervention services. I know Agenda Alexandria is going to be good enough to put a flyer up of what to look for and what to know about fentanyl. Last year, the school board also added Narcan to our school buildings. We have the officers, of course, who carry, but we also have at every K-12 school clinic, we now have Narcan and trained people in case there's ever an accident of any sort. So this is one of the top priorities out of Student Services and Equity.
And what can people do if they have concerns? There's a tip line that people can contribute to. Explain that.
Sure. Well, first, if you have concerns, I would say there are a couple different resources. You always have your school level support. So every school has a student support team. You have your principals and your administrators, of course, but every school has a school psychologist, a school counselor, a school social worker, a school nurse. And if you are having concerns or you're seeing atypical behavior in your teen or your child and want to gather some more information, they're a great starting point, as well as Student Services in general has a general ACPS email address that you can send information to. We have had the tip line historically, which relates to the mayor's campaign to end bullying. We started a tip line where people could do an anonymous tip. I do want to share, I trialed it before I came today, and I think with our switch on the website, we need to make sure that it converted properly. So we're meeting tomorrow morning at 9 to make sure that tip line is up and moving and that I'm giving you accurate information. The importance of the tip line is that it's anonymous. And parents, staff, and students can send it in. In lieu of anonymous, you can always use the student services email address or reach out to one of those resources. But I will give my own public service announcement to just remember that Narcan is free in the city. You go and you receive your training and you can keep it in your house, and there's no downside for using it if you're ever fearful of an overdose. There is no downside. It can only potentially save a life. And I know our officers have had to use it, and some of our community members have had to use it and have successfully saved lives as a result.
Well, you just mentioned community members. That brings us to a community group that we want to talk about next with the virtual participant here on our panel, Renee Islas, who you see up on our screen. He founded a community group that had concerns about school security. Renee Islas, could you talk to us about the creation of a survey and what you learned from that survey?
Sure. We learned something very simple, that parents are extremely concerned about school safety. They recognized that every time that there is a lockdown, every time there is a secure the building, every time there's an evacuation in the school, learning was lost. So Dr. Berg mentioned that he wasn't familiar with the learning loss that might occur under these new circumstances, but they were very clear that safety and incidences, 194 incidences that happened in the second half of last year, were disturbing learning for every student, not just those that were directly impacted by them. And they made it very clear. They were concerned about school safety, and they wanted solutions, and they were willing to kind of at least take it into their own hands to offer those solutions to the school system.
Excellent. And so tell me a little bit about the specific things that came out of that survey. So you had a number of things that you were focused on: school resource officers, transparency, an early warning system, and more personnel in the schools. When I talked to you earlier, you said you felt like you accomplished most of those, right? Explain what happened as a result of this survey.
We started most of those. I don't think we accomplished them. Mission's not accomplished until we start seeing safety increase in our schools, which we are still waiting for. But we do know that there has been some positive movement to make sure that there's honest data about the schools. We just saw recently a report come out from the school system that identified those 194 incidences, those 26 arrests. We believe that it's really important for the school system to release those reports at least at a minimum on a quarterly basis. But
wait, which reports are you talking about, Mr. Islas? Say that one more time. Which reports were you referring to?
This is a safety report that was released by the school district recently.
A safety report.
On the number of incidences that occurred in the schools.
Are we talking about a presentation at a school board meeting?
It was at a school board meeting. Do you have trouble finding that?
Julie Crawford, would you like to weigh in?
I was just commenting that what Mr. Islas was referring to was Thursday night. We had a presentation by our Chief of Facilities and Operations, including the staff members from Safety and Security, that highlighted the second semester, quarter 3 and quarter 4 data from the end of the school year. And it is publicly available. Both the video and the data that's being referenced is available on the ACPS website.
Okay, excellent. I'd like to ask the Chief of Police about the team effort. When I talked to you earlier, you made the interesting point, which is this is a team effort to handle this issue, and it involves teachers. It even involves students. Explain the team effort and who should be participating in this.
When I talked about the team effort, I'm always talking about partnerships with the police department, working with the school system, working with the businesses in the area, and then I also said, but the students also have to play a very important role in this, because a lot of times when things are about to happen in the schools, someone else knows, and it's a student. When a person is bringing a contraband into the school, someone else knows, and it's a student. If someone's even gonna bring a weapon in the school, it's been proven out that before they do that, most of the time, someone has been told, a peer or another teenager has been told that they actually have a weapon and they will go into the school with it. And so if we can get them to understand how dangerous that is and how they can make a stance and take a stance, even anonymously, to let us know these things, we can prevent a lot of things from happening before they happen.
You know, on that issue, back in the 1996 incident with the stabbing at George Washington Middle School, there was a lot of buzz about the potential one gang coming and engaging with this other gang. There was like an Alexandria gang, and there was also a West End gang, and they had actual sort of formal gang affiliations, and sort of one group, ambushed the other group, and the school knew what was going to happen. I mean, the teachers were really concerned about potentially letting out for the day because they suspected something bad might happen, and in fact, somebody got stabbed and died that day. Herberg, you were superintendent at that time. Did the school make the right choice by letting the kids out that day, right? So like they could have kept the kids inside of the school. They decided, despite their concerns about security, to release the students. That's when the two rival gangs had this fight with each other. What should they have done in that situation?
Well, obviously, because of the youngster was killed, it was a wrong decision. They should have kept him in the school. In hindsight now, locking down the students into the classroom where there's an adult teacher and others, and they're all in their room, the doors are closed, and you hold people in place. I think that's the way most security directions are today.
Mm-hmm. And we have lots of questions coming in. If you have questions, we want your questions. Rod Cuckrow's walking around with some Post-it notes, so please make sure you write down your question. And also make sure it's legible. Rod Cuckrow has a hard time reading some of the handwriting that you people have, so write clearly, please. All right, so questions coming in. There have been arrests, I suppose this is for the police chief. There have been arrests at the high school for drug offenses this year. What were the offenses, and why isn't it more broadly communicated to parents? So, concerns about things that are going on in the high school and why aren't police investigating? I'm sure you get these kinds of questions all the time. What would you say to parents and people here in Alexandria that that they want things investigated at the schools?
Well, we actually do investigate the crimes that are brought to our attention at the schools. And we give the report to the schools, and they make that report available every quarter. And so it's read out, and so people actually know what things are going on in the schools. But the thing I want to make a distinction is that we don't get involved in the disciplinary areas that the school brings out. If it's not a crime, we don't get involved in it.
A question for the ACPS official we've got on our panel. So I'm wondering about substance abuse intervention versus a law enforcement approach. I mean, like, what should happen with these kids that get caught up into this system? Like, what's the best possible outcome here for these kids?
Well, you have a range of incidents that could happen in a school. You could have a student who does not have possession, but we have concerns that perhaps they're altered in some way, and that referral is sent to our office. And the best case scenario there is that they work one-to-one with our substance abuse counselor. They get an evaluation. They're deemed on the lower end of needing support, and they and their families participate in what we call our opportunity seminar, which is required if you have come to our office for some type of disciplinary training related to our substance abuse. We have our partners, as I mentioned, from the city there, from SAPCA, the Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition of Alexandria, partners from Court Services Unit. So if there was something that a student was court involved or arrested for, we are able to work with court services and receive referrals from them. Like I said, best case scenario, however, is we didn't reach that point. We're able to get a sense of what the student's needs are, work with the family, and address them before you reach a level that a child is court involved.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Berg, I was interested in getting your thoughts on this issue in terms of the best approach here, a law enforcement approach or a social services approach. If you think about what happened in the 1990s, that was a tough on crime era, and the defendant in that case was a juvenile, but he was tried as an adult under the new juvenile get tough on crime thing from the 90s. And so he was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, which had a maximum sentence of 6 months. But the judge in the case deviated from the state guidelines to give him 5 years, because that was the tough on crime sort of thing that was going on in the summer of 1996. So was that successful? Did all that 1990s tough on crime stuff, did that work?
The tough on crime thinking, Bill Clinton was president when I think he authorized 100,000 more police officers across the country. He had a ceremony.
He campaigned on it in 1996.
I'm
right?
sorry?
So he campaigned on that issue in 1996. In fact, the same year.
It was a national referendum on what you ought to be doing, and tough on crime was one of it. Longer sentences, harsher punishments, keep them off the street, all that kind of thinking. Certainly when they're in jail, they're not robbing anything or doing anything, but they're going to come out eventually. They're going to come back on the street, and how they come back to life has never been worked out. The recidivism rate, and you know the exact numbers, but it's horrible. That I'm not a police officer. I'm not a criminologist, and I really don't.
Mr. Police Chief, what is the recidivism rate?
I don't know the exact number of the recidivism rate, but we all know from statistics that it wasn't very high, and it didn't do a lot of good by raising the levels of incarceration for a lot of times what would be considered now minor offenses. And I think we're taking a different approach these days, and we're looking at more in nonviolent situations where we're using diversions, like Dr. Julie says, that so we might be able to get the people the help that they actually need, as opposed to incarcerate them, which is not going to really give them the help that they actually need.
Can I comment on that as well? Just as the perspective from the school system, and also my background as working in the juvenile detention center as the principal for a number of years, because I think what you said, Mr. Berg, hit home with me of if we take a child who has, you say, a bump in the road, a significant bump in the road, but something that has landed them in the detention center, the question that we have to ask ourselves as professionals who work with these children is, what have we done to either equip them with a different problem-solving skill set or change, as opposed to taking them out of the environment, putting them in detention for however long, and then returning the kids to the exact same environment without truly remediating and working on rehabilitation. I think even in my time in Alexandria, we've seen a shift with that in the court system, referencing the diversion programs that we have, the drug courts that we have, as well as the restorative philosophy in ACPS. So yes, you still may have faced a suspension because of a significant issue, but what are we also doing to have students either do an anger management program, a conflict-wise problem solving, so that if the situation comes up again, you make different decisions in that realm. And that's the concept of being restorative, that it doesn't do away with the discipline action if it is a significant incident, but we're trying to change the path of what we do, as opposed to just suspending and returning to school without any intervention, because that is not successful. And zero tolerance policies from discipline have not been shown to be successful.
We have a hands up on Zoom. Mr. Islas, would you like to weigh in on this?
Definitely. I think what's really important to understand is that there are a number of students that rise to the level of criminal activity that need to be supported either through the juvenile justice system that actually does provide a lot of reformative kind of measures. And then we need to worry about students before they get there. We want to make sure that students get what they need in terms of their own health and safety, their well-being, their emotional needs met before they even commit these issues. And so one of the things that I'm concerned about is that we need to treat those as two separate matters. There have been instances at least 84 calls to police in the second half of the school year that need to be treated at the level of criminal activity for students. It might be appropriate to have those students go through the juvenile justice system to get the support that they need to return to society. I'm not saying lock them up and throw away the key, but if there is an attempted murder, if there is an attempted mob attack or actual mob attack, if there are physical beatings of other students, that needs to be taken care of, not just by immediate kind of talk therapy, but talk therapy plus real accountability for those students.
Mr. Islis, can I ask you about that? Mr. Islis, can I interrupt here? In terms of accountability, you have a particular interest in creating a new office, the Victims Advocate. Could you explain what you want to do with the Victims Advocate role in the school system?
Correct. I think it's flipping this all on its head. Right now, we're talking about the perpetrator. In a lot of cases, all of the conversation has been that way. But we have to remember that there's someone on the other side of that. That is the victim who might be a victim of an assault or another injurious kind of activity that has been reported. And what we are suggesting, the community group is suggesting, is that there is somebody on the side of the victim to support them in thinking through getting protective orders through the juvenile justice system, getting support, mental health services for the victim. All of these things that we automatically, in our school system, that is focused on those that are perpetrating these acts, we need to remember that we need to support those that are victims of these issues as well.
Did you have any response to that, Julie Crawford?
No, just that I agree. And when things come up, of course, it is important to identify, is the victim okay in all senses? And how can we support from potentially counseling, looking at, safety plans in the school system, but really hearing the voice of the victim. I do agree with that. And then how are we supporting them moving forward so that they do feel comfortable being in school if something has happened?
Question from the audience. This is for Julie Crawford. Please discuss measuring progress for every student, not just attainment. I know recently there was a change made to how schools are accredited, and they measure progress. They weigh progress more heavily than they used to. It used to be either, there was the pass rate, you either passed or you didn't, and there were punitive measures tied to that. Now there's a new weight for progress in these accreditation rankings. Please discuss these measuring progress and how important that is to educators.
Sure, and I think probably most people are familiar with the No Child Left Behind concept of having certain measures across the board for participation and performance, and you met it or you didn't. So you could be a school system, hypothetically going back to the NCLB or No Child Left Behind, where maybe your students were not doing well, passing at 50%, and then the following year or the year after they're passing at 80%, but the benchmark was 85. And that's still a failure with that lens of just the one set benchmark. And when you look at what new accreditation standards are, they are looking at what is the baseline and have you shown growth and to what degree.
The criticism of that is you're moving the goalposts. What do you say to that?
Well, I think your goalposts are, I was going to use a football analogy, but your goalposts are still there as to what they need, but you're making your way down the field. So you didn't, throw a Hail Mary or kick a field goal from your own 10-yard line. You are making that progress as you move down the field on every down, with that goal not changing of what you want to get to.
We have more questions, but I'm wondering if anyone else has any thoughts on that measuring progress. Mr. Islis, do you have any thoughts on the importance of measuring progress? Or there are people who feel like it's a bad idea to measure progress and that you either pass or you don't.
I do have some comments on that. One, first of all, is that our accreditation at the state level Even the state Virginia Department of Education is starting to criticize its own accreditation standards, and it's starting to suggest that the accreditation standards are not helping the students succeed. We know that very few students in Virginia, in Alexandria, 61% of students in ACPS have passed the English and reading test. We know that only 46 have passed the math test. And I would go back, I'm going to bring this back to school safety. That if we know that Maslow's hierarchy of needs tells us that we need to have physiological safety, and then we have to have actual safety, like no harm done to our bodies. If those are not met, the students will never thrive at the level that they should. And I suggest that this data of 61%, of 49%, is actually an example of why we are not achieving as much as that we should, because we have a safety issue in Alexandria.
If anyone else likes to comment on that, Mr. Berg, you have any thoughts on that? Because I have a different question I was going to ask the chief.
Let's go to the next question.
All right, fine. So this question, I'm sure, is for the chief of police. Do gangs still exist? So we were talking about this summer of 1996 incident. There were two gangs. There was the Los Bravos. They were the West Alexandria gang, and then the Latin Homies were the Arlandria gang. And they were, referred to openly in newspaper columns, from that time period. And so, I mean, clearly gangs existed in a formal sense, like in the courtrooms in that time period. What about now? Do we have gangs right now in Alexandria, Mr. Police Chief?
Yes, we have gangs, and we also have a group that we call crews that go around with a lot of young males and going around and just doing violent acts, but also just committing crimes and things like that. And yes, we know that they are definitely in not just our school system, but in our neighborhoods, and we're doing the best we can to address those issues when we.
Are they formalized in the same way, like in the 90s? Like these were a very kind of formalized groups here, and they were actually recognized by the courts as gangs, for legal proceedings. Are the modern version, the things that are going on now, are they kind of as formalized as was in the 1990s?
I think they're formalized, and I think they're also more organized because they're using, intelligence and all those types of things to make sure that they try to stay a step ahead of what we're doing to try to catch them.
And Mr. Berg, if I could get your thoughts here on, people saw this coming in a way, right? Because the leaders in Alexandria at that time were aware of the rising gang problems in the 1990s. And I believe after the stabbing, there was a movement to have gang awareness, and there was like a real effort to cut down on these specific kinds of crimes, right? What do you recall of that era in terms of sort of how the city went about accomplishing that goal?
This is the third time I say this, but that's 25 years ago, and gangs and gang violence and prevention have evolved over those years. In our years, it seems so simple today to say that there were the Crips and the Bloods, and they had red tags and they had blue tags. And we were after junior high school kids and others that they couldn't wear a red bandana or a red patch in their pocket. I mean, it seems so simple today to be saying that was a priority. It's like Bill mentioned in the happy hour here, that I think it was an aunt or someone who was a teacher when chewing gum was an issue in the school. I mean, that's how the gang thing was in my time here. Today they're sophisticated. There's guns, there's knives, there's communication devices. They're organized, not like you guys, but they're organized. Right. It wasn't quite like that in the old days.
Question from the audience for our ACPS administrator about restorative justice. Does restorative justice deter kids from committing additional crimes? Is there data to back that up?
That's the philosophy of where restorative justice, and because we aren't a justice system, we utilize restorative practices. And it goes along with what Mr. Islis was just saying about your degree of feeling safe. And also what the chief was saying earlier about how things can be reported. And when you have a trusting adult in a school system, when you have people who you feel know you, the first tier of a restorative practice is a community circle. And what research will show is, you're less likely to commit an infraction or harm upon someone who you know and have made a connection with. And so with restorative practices, again, that's the tier one, that's the first level of community building to build a safe environment in a classroom and as a result in a school. If we have that throughout the building, that yes, that the research shows that is likely to deter you from a significant infraction or harm upon one of those people that you just got to know. Then as you get to the upper levels, you get into restorative circles and restorative conferences, and those are more specialized professionals facilitating that, and that is after something has occurred, and where appropriate, you utilize that.
Mr. Islis, do you have any thoughts on restorative justice? Have you seen this work in the school system, and what are your thoughts on it?
My concern about this is that the restorative practices that are being called upon in ACPS aren't happening. Recent data from ACPS that show but they're not being implemented.
It this way with Hertberg first. So you mentioned, you name dropped Dana Lawhorn. Was he SRO? Explain how the system worked at that time.
Well, there wasn't an SRO at that time. So he was a juvenile police officer assigned to the schools. He was the only officer that we dealt with, and he wore khaki pants and a police polo shirt. I remember he wore a badge on his belt. I don't remember if he was weaponized or not.
Yeah, he was.
Was he?
Yes.
Yeah. I tried to remember. I'm sure it was going to be asked to that tonight, and I could not recall ever seeing that. But if he did, he did. And if we had a problem, or if John Porter, who was our high school principal, needed help, Dana was there. Dana, I'm not sure he was assigned to come to the school every day, but generally he drove by and came in to the high school and checked in every day. A little later, there was the DARE program sponsored by car dealerships, and that was a big deal for 3 or 4 years, 5 years maybe. The research came along that didn't have any impact, and that quietly went away.
All right, so our current SRO program is we've got 2 at the high school, 1 at Minnie Howard, and 1 at GW. I think I got that right, Mr. Police Chief. Correct me if I didn't.
And 1 in Hammond.
And 1 at Hammond. Okay, cool. So question from the audience. Is it true that SROs cannot get involved if they see a physical altercation?
No, that's not true. If they see an assault taking place, they can take action on that. And they do. But
Could
now,
you
as
elaborate
far as-
on that? Like
yeah, but as far as what happens, again, the school administration can come in, and sometimes, you get the parents involved, and a lot of times they don't want it to go to the criminal level. They want to try to handle it within house, and they do. Because remember, the victim has a say-so in all of that.
Another question from the audience about the crimes, plural, that have happened in the recent past. How can I feel like my child is going to be safe at school on a daily basis? I'm sure you get these questions all the time, just a generalized feeling of insecurity. What do you say to parents in our audience who are concerned about sending their children to the school system every day?
I believe that, again, there are going to be incidents that are going to happen, but I believe that because of the partnerships that we've developed there, and because of our presence there, because of the extra security that and I'm just speaking specifically for the high schools and the middle schools, because they're there. I know for a fact this year has been less eventful than the past 2 years. And I'm talking about even before the pandemic happened. And I think it's getting to a point now where we are communicating better. We are making the contacts with the students again, getting to know who they are. They're getting to know who we are. I mean, just recently, a week before last, I was up at the high school. I was walking around with Principal Bayless, and then we were walking through the hallways, and I'm seeing the kids, you know, interacting with each other, but also interacting with the staff, and really having what I consider to be a good time in school. And I think those things will happen. Are we still going to have incidents? Yes, but you're going to have incidents in your neighborhood. You're going to have incidents everywhere. And I just think we have to continue to work on that and continue to move forward and not live in a state of fear, because, you know, things are happening. It's a change in society.
Mr. Islas, the police chief just said this year has been less eventful than the previous year. Would you agree with that assessment?
That's good news. And I think what we have seen is actually more engagement between the police, the city, and the schools. And that's a welcome change. So thank you, Chief Hayes and school system administrators for that. I think we need more, and it needs to continue.
Question for the school administrator on our panel. Do we have a system for taking troubled students out of the class so learning can continue? So what happens if you've got a class and someone's being disruptive? Do they stay and disrupt the class, or what happens to that student?
Well, I'll go back to, hopefully, we have utilized different practices to have an environment where ideally you head off a situation before your student comes in, because you're able to identify that they don't look like they're in the best place that morning, and before a student starts to disrupt. But disruptions obviously do happen. We have a code of conduct in ACPS. We have different positive behavior intervention systems that schools utilize. But the bottom line is, if you have a student who is interrupting the student's learning, then we have different levels of support. And it may get to the point that, and we have school board policy on it, that the child needs to be asked to leave the classroom and go to usually a school administrator for disciplinary action, finding out what is going on, why the disruptions are taking place, and moving forward from there.
Great. I think, unfortunately, we are running out of time because we have to wrap this thing up at 8. I personally would like to go much longer than 8 o'clock, but I think we do have to wrap it up. So I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to make a final round here, starting with Mr. Islas on our screen here virtually. What would you like our audience to take away from your experience putting together this survey, learning from the survey, creating this community group, and seeing action? What kind of takeaways do you want our audience to have from all that experience?
I think the big takeaway is that parents and the community do matter. And when the community gathers together to provide solutions and not just call out the issue, but both of those, call out the issue and provide solutions, that change can happen in the school system, and they can be part of that change. So I hope that they will continue to do that work to make our school system better, our city better, so that we can all live here happily and work together in this.
Julie, hello? Okay. And Julie Crawford, I'd love for you to end, if you wouldn't mind, on the mayor's bullying campaign. So I think the mayor might be here. I was trying to get him to come. Talk a little bit about the mayor's bullying campaign and what people should know about it.
Sure, we have, and this has been going on for a number of years, I think it might even predate me, that the mayor has a number of organizations, including our rec department, our police department, the school system, and different city agencies, court services, that have historically come together, talk to our youth. We have youth members who have served, again, historically. During COVID times, we weren't able to come together as much, but to provide supports and identify safe places and resources to our families and our students, both in the school and in the community, if there is an experience of any bullying, knowing who you can report it to, where you can get resources and supports. And we think that's a critical aspect to students feeling safe and secure in the community in general, including in schools.
Hello. Okay. And Mr. Police Chief, you mentioned earlier we can't be ruled by fear. And, when we were discussing the situation earlier, you talked about television news being so violent and people will get the wrong impression about what the world is really like based on what they see on especially television news. What is that dichotomy? Explain the difference, the distinction between the fears that people have based on what they see on their television screens versus the reality of the actual situation here in Alexandria.
I believe sometimes we get to a point where we begin to watch so much of the media, it becomes our reality. And I stand before you to tell you that my children went through the public school system, and I stayed engaged with them, and my daughter graduated from then the T.C. Williams High School, and we never thought about her being harmed or hurt in the school system. We knew the staff there, again, because I work in the city. We had the SROs there, and I just believe that we do a very good job here in the city of Alexandria. Even before I was invited here, my staff will attest to this. For the past 4 weeks, we've been visiting every school, every public school, talking to the principals, getting engaged, trying to find out what we can do better to better our partnership, to better calm any fears they might have about what they might see, so that people can realize, because we do believe that children will learn better when they feel safe. And if they see us there, I think that's going to be a big change in how they learn.
All right. And Herberg, I've saved you for last because you said something to me in our conversation that really struck with me, which is that having a focus on security is a distraction from student learning, and that school officials need to have a singular focus on just student learning and improving that metric. Explain the situation that we're in right now. Like how, with all these concerns about security that we have been discussing all night long, how do we keep a focus on student learning?
Well, let me say this program was about security in schools, and I honor and respect the topic and the conversation. But it seems to me the bigger problem and the genuine crisis in the schools here is student learning. And a focus is on a lot of things, and you hardly ever read about the singular focus on improving learning. It's always been a challenge in the school system with the children that we have, but with the loss of 2 years of education, it is a genuine crisis. I think the city council and the mayor needs to be asking for a meeting with the city school board and the superintendent, and the best minds in the city put their arms around this issue. These kids have lost an education, and you're not going to be able to make it up if you don't make it the number one priority. Children have to learn, and they're behind, and I don't see the urgency to get after it. And let me say, during my years here and then when I was in South Carolina as a superintendent, I made the learning the number one priority. Everything else we did had to be circled around by where we were committed to education. The kind of teacher that is recruited into Alexandria, in my view, there needs to be a correction on that. And let me tell you, this is an emergency room educational system. This is not a country hospital out in Loudoun County. This is an emergency room in the city. And during my time here, I tried not to ever hire a first, second, third, or fourth year teacher. The children and the challenges that the children face here are way beyond that. You need emergency room doctors, specially trained and educated teachers who can focus on the bottom line and what the job is. And this is not a school district where first-year teachers should ever be hired. You're still learning your craft 3, 4, 5, 6 years in. That's the kind of teacher that ought to be coming in here.
All right. Well, we sadly have come to the time where our program has ended. I'd like the audience to give a big round of applause for our panel. Thank you so much. Thank you to our virtual participant. And thank you to our technical team up here. Thank you so much for the audio and getting the broadcast out. You can watch this on demand, and I want everyone to have a wonderful night. Thank you so much for coming.
This is Agenda Alexandria, a nonpartisan organization that takes a look at the issues without taking sides. Whether it's the city's sewer system, education, public safety, climate change, or perhaps a look back into Alexandria's history, Agenda Alexandria is here to shine a light. What makes the organization so successful is our people. The people who run it, our panelists, our moderators, and of course, our members. Agenda Alexandria is a member-funded organization, and we invite you to become one today by visiting agendaalexandria.org.